All right, welcome to the deep dive. We're diving headfirst into the intricate world of global business today. I know you're here because you want to understand what it takes to make it in that global market, right? But you don't have all day. We get it. We totally get it. That's what we're here for. We're going to break it down for you, make it as efficient as possible.
Yeah, think of this as your crash course in global business. We're going to cover the most important things you need to know to plan effectively if you're thinking about expanding your business internationally. And you know what? Even if you're not planning to go global, a lot of these factors still matter. The world's so interconnected now that even local businesses are affected by what's happening on a global scale.
So you're saying no business is an island anymore. I like that. All right, so what's the game plan for today's deep dive?
We've got a lot to cover, so buckle up. We're going to start by looking at those overseas competitors and how to navigate those potentially lucrative overseas markets.
Okay, so competition and opportunities. Sounds good. What else?
Then we'll tackle offshoring labor. That's a big one. We'll explore the pros and cons, the challenges, and the ethical considerations.
I'm intrigued. What's next?
We'll demystify the often confusing world of exchange rates. You'll learn how they work and how they can impact your bottom line. Then we'll dive into the essential steps for protecting your intellectual property globally, including patents, copyrights, and trademarks.
Right, because your ideas are valuable and you need to make sure you're protected, especially when you're operating on a global scale. And what about online sales? I mean, that's huge these days, right?
Absolutely. It's practically non-negotiable in today's market. We'll wrap up by exploring why a strong online presence is so vital for any business, even those that might consider themselves primarily local.
All right, let's jump right in. Tell me about those overseas competitors. How do they fit into this whole globalized business world?
Well, globalization has really changed the game. Think about it. Advancements in technology, efficient global supply chains, and reduced trade barriers mean that businesses can operate across borders more easily than ever before. This has essentially created a single global marketplace where companies from all over the world can compete for customers.
Yeah, I get that. It's like that whole it's a small world thing, but for business, right? So what does that mean for businesses that are just starting out? What do they need to think about when they're planning?
The key really is to build a strong competitive advantage. This is something you hear a lot in business, but in a global context, it takes on even more importance. It's not just about being good. It's about figuring out what makes your business uniquely strong on a global stage.
So it's not just about beating the competition down the street anymore. You've got to be thinking about companies on the other side of the world, right?
Exactly. You need to know what your core strengths are. Can you offer something that nobody else can? Can you produce it more efficiently or with higher quality? And another crucial aspect is cost reduction. Can you find ways to streamline your operations, source materials more effectively, or take advantage of opportunities in other countries to bring your costs down?
Right. So being competitive on price is always important, but it sounds like it's even more critical in a global market where you might be up against businesses with lower labor costs or different access to resources.
Precisely. And don't forget about innovation. Finding ways to differentiate your products or services through innovation is incredibly important in a crowded marketplace. It could be about developing a new product that meets a specific global need or finding a way to improve an existing product to make it more appealing to international customers.
So it's not just about being cheaper, it's about being better, smarter, or more innovative. And it sounds like you need to have a really good understanding of what your competitors are doing, not just locally, but globally.
That's right. It's like a giant game of chess. You need to know who your competitors are, what their strategies are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and you need to be constantly looking for ways to exploit those weaknesses and gain an advantage. For example, Australian winemakers have successfully targeted the Chinese market by understanding the growing demand for premium wines there and tailoring their marketing and distribution accordingly.
Okay, so we've got to be sharp, understand our strengths, and be ready to outmaneuver the competition. But how about the flip side? Let's talk about selling overseas. What are some of the things businesses need to think about when they're considering expanding into international markets?
Selling internationally can be a fantastic way to grow your business. It allows you to tap into new customer bases, diversify your income streams, and reduce your reliance on any one particular market. But there are definitely some unique challenges to consider.
Yeah, I bet. It's not as simple as just packing up your products and shipping them off to another country, is it?
Not quite. There are a lot of logistical hurdles to overcome. Think about transportation and distribution networks. These can be much more complex when you're dealing with international borders, different customs regulations, and varying infrastructure.
Right, so getting your product to those international customers can be a whole challenge in itself.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of currency conversion. You need to understand how exchange rates work and how they can impact your pricing and profitability. And of course, there are taxes and duties to consider. These can vary significantly from country to country, and you need to factor them into your cost calculations.
So it's like a whole new set of rules and regulations to learn.
It can feel that way at times.
Yeah.
And don't forget about marketing and packaging. What resonates with customers in your home market might not work in another country. You might need to adapt your marketing messages, your packaging, even your product itself to appeal to different cultural preferences and sensitivities.
That makes sense. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach when you're going global.
Absolutely not. And perhaps the most important consideration is the legal and regulatory landscape. Laws governing business practices, consumer protection, and even product safety can vary dramatically from country to country. It's crucial to do your research and make sure you're compliant with all the relevant regulations in the markets you're targeting.
Okay, so it sounds like careful planning, research, and maybe even some expert advice are crucial when you're thinking about expanding internationally. Now, I know the source material mentions a really helpful resource for Australian businesses, the Australian Trade Commission, or Austrade. What can they offer businesses looking to go global?
Austrade is a fantastic resource. They offer a wide range of support to Australian businesses looking to export or invest overseas. They can provide information on export markets, connect you with potential buyers and partners, assist with navigating legal and regulatory hurdles, and even offer financial assistance in some cases.
So they're like a one-stop shop for all things export related.
Pretty much. They can really help to simplify the process and make it less daunting for businesses that are new to international trade. I read a case study about a small Australian skincare company that was able to successfully enter the Japanese market with the help of Austrad. They assisted with market research, regulatory compliance, and even introduced them to a local distributor.
That's a great example of how valuable that kind of support can be. And speaking of examples, the source material gives us a case study of Select Harvest, the Australian almond growers. What can we learn from their experience in the global market?
Select Harvest is a great example of an Australian business that has really capitalized on the growing global demand for almonds. They've been very strategic in their approach, diversifying their export markets, and partnering with Austrade to navigate the complexities of international trade. They've seen significant growth in markets like Southeast Asia and Europe.
So they didn't just stumble into international success, they had a plan, did the research, and sought out expert advice.
Exactly. And their success has had a ripple effect on the entire Australian almond industry. The increased global demand has encouraged other growers to expand their operations, and it's even led to new entrants into the market. It's a real testament to the power of thinking globally and actively pursuing international opportunities.
I love that. It's like one company's success can benefit the entire industry and even the broader economy.
All right, let's switch gears now and talk about another important aspect of global business, offshoring labor. What exactly does that involve?
Offshoring labor basically means moving certain business processes or services to another country. It could be anything from a manufacturing to customer service to IT support.
And why would a business choose to do that? What are the main reasons?
It often comes down to cost savings. Labor costs can be significantly lower in other countries, and there can also be benefits in terms of accessing specialized skills or taking advantage of more favorable economic conditions. Okay, so it's about finding ways to reduce costs and improve efficiency. But I know offshoring can be a controversial topic. What are some of the concerns that people have?
There are definitely some valid concerns. One of the biggest worries is the potential for job losses in the home country when companies move operations overseas. There are also concerns about the potential for exploitation of workers in countries with less stringent labor laws and lower wages. It's important for businesses to consider these ethical implications very carefully.
Right. So it's not just about the bottom line. There's a social responsibility aspect to consider as well. And I know the source material mentions some prominent Australian companies like Telstra and Qantas that have utilized offshoring.
Yes, both companies have used offshore call centers to handle customer service inquiries. And Qantas has also used offshore maintenance facilities for aircraft servicing. These are just a couple of examples of how Australian businesses are incorporating offshoring into their operations.
Okay, let's move on to another topic that can be a bit complex but is essential to understand in the global business world: exchange rates. Can you explain what an exchange rate is in simple terms?
Sure. An exchange rate is simply the price of one currency in terms of another currency. It tells you how much of one currency you need to exchange to get a certain amount of another currency.
So it's like a constantly fluctuating price for money, right? It can go up, it can go down.
Exactly. And these fluctuations can have a significant impact on businesses that are operating internationally. For example, let's say the Australian dollar depreciates against the US dollar. This means that it takes more Australian dollars to buy the same amount of US dollars. This can be good news for Australian businesses that are exporting to the US because their products will become cheaper for American buyers. But it can be bad news for Australian businesses that are importing from the US because their costs will go up.
So a weaker Australian dollar can help exporters but hurt importers. And what about the opposite scenario? What if the Australian dollar appreciates or strengthens against the US dollar?
Then the opposite happens. Australian exports become more expensive for American buyers, and imports from the US become cheaper for Australian businesses. This can make it harder for Australian exporters to compete in the US market, but it can be a good time for Australian businesses to import goods or materials from the US.
Right, so exchange rate fluctuations can really swing things one way or the other depending on whether you're importing or exporting.
And it's not just the US dollar that matters, of course. Exchange rates are constantly fluctuating between all currencies around the world. It's a complex and dynamic market that businesses need to monitor closely.
Okay, so keeping an eye on those exchange rates and understanding how they can impact your business is crucial when you're operating globally. Now let's talk about protecting your intellectual property. Why is it so important to think about this from a global perspective?
In today's global marketplace, your intellectual property is more valuable than ever. It's what sets you apart from the competition. But it's also more vulnerable than ever because it's easier for competitors to copy your ideas or infringe on your trademarks. That's why it's so important to think about protecting your IP globally, not just in your home country.
So you're saying that just because you have a patent or a trademark in Australia doesn't necessarily mean you're protected in other countries.
That's right. Intellectual property rights are territorial, meaning they only apply within the borders of the country where they are granted. So if you want to protect your IP in other countries, you need to take specific steps to secure those rights in those jurisdictions.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. Let's start with patents. What exactly is a patent, and how do you go about getting one internationally?
A patent is basically a legal right that gives you exclusive control over an invention for a certain period of time. It prevents others from making, using, or selling your invention without your permission. To get a patent internationally, you generally have two options. You can either file separate patent applications in each country where you want protection, or you can use the Patent Cooperation Treaty, PCT. The PCT is an international treaty that allows you to file a single patent application that covers multiple countries.
Okay, so the PCT sounds like a more efficient way to get international patent protection. But it's still not a guarantee, right? You still have to meet patent requirements in each individual country.
That's right. The PCT doesn't automatically grant you a patent in every country. It just streamlines the process and gives you more time to decide which countries you ultimately want to pursue protection in.
All right, let's move on to copyrights. How do those work internationally?
Copyrights are a bit different from patents. They protect original works of authorship, such as books, music, art, and software. The good news is that copyright protection is generally automatic in most countries. You don't have to register your work to get copyright protection. However, it's still a good idea to include a copyright notice on your work to make it clear that you own the copyright.
So if I read a song or paint a picture, I automatically have copyright protection in most countries.
That's right. But as with patents, copyright protection is territorial. So if you want to enforce your copyright in another country, you might need to take legal action in that country.
And finally, let's talk about trademarks. How do those work on a global scale?
Trademarks are all about protecting your brand identity. They can be words, logos, slogans, or even sounds or colors that distinguish your goods or services from those of your competitors. To protect your trademark internationally, you can either file separate trademark applications in each country where you want protection, or use the Madrid system. The Madrid system is an international treaty that allows you to file a single trademark application that covers multiple countries.
Okay, so it's similar to the PCT for patents. You can file one application that covers multiple countries, but you still need to meet the trademark requirements in each country.
Exactly. And just like with patents and copyrights, trademark protection is territorial. So if someone infringes on your trademark in another country, you might need to take legal action in that country to enforce your rights.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground today, but before we wrap up, let's talk about the final piece of the global business puzzle, online sales. Is it really necessary for businesses to have an online presence these days?
It's pretty much essential. The way people shop has changed dramatically in recent years, and online sales are now a huge part of the global economy. If you don't have an online presence, you're missing out on a massive opportunity to reach potential customers all over the world.
Yeah, I can see that. But what about the challenges? Setting up an online store can be a lot of work, and there are things like shipping and payment processing to figure out.
That's true. There are definitely some challenges to overcome. But there are also a lot of resources available to help businesses get started with online sales. And the potential rewards are huge. The internet has broken down so many barriers to entry and is now possible for businesses of all sizes to compete on a global scale.
Okay, so neglecting online sales is not an option for businesses that want to thrive in today's global marketplace.
Absolutely not. It's an essential part of doing business in the 21st century.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of global business. We've covered a lot of ground today, from understanding the competitive landscape to navigating international markets, from the complexities of offshoring to the importance of protecting your intellectual property globally, and finally, to the absolute necessity of having a strong online presence.
It's been a great discussion, and I hope our listeners have gained a better understanding of the key considerations for businesses operating in today's interconnected world.
I agree. And as a final thought for our listeners, I want to leave you with this question. How might seemingly local businesses be more affected by global factors than we might initially think?
That's a great question to ponder. In today's interconnected world, even the smallest of businesses can be impacted by global events, trends, and economic forces. It's more important than ever for businesses to be aware of the global landscape and to think strategically about how they can position themselves for success in this ever-changing world.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.